Hi, and welcome to the Wellness Arts Cafe, Creatively Being. This is storytelling number 1. This is a story I learned perhaps 20 years ago, and I do not recall the origin. I do know that it is similar to a Japanese story that I have heard and also seen a film about. The story is titled Grandmother's Cherry Farm. This story happened someplace in time. A long time ago or modern times. I'll let you decide. There was a really beautiful, beautiful cherry farm, and it was in its 5th generation with the family, and they were renowned for their beautiful Montmorency tart cherries and their sweet Stellas and their Lapin sweets. And people came from miles and miles around during cherry season, well, during cherry blossom season too, to see the beautiful, beautiful plumes of white blossoms festooning all the trees on their farm. And then at cherry ripe time in June, July, they came to purchase as much as they were allowed to purchase, because every year there was a limit, because the family was big on making jams and jellies and pies and tarts and you name it, syrups of all kinds of, oh God, cherry syrup is wonderful. Well, anyway, I'm kind of getting off the subject. So this family had this wonderful cherry farm, and they lived in a place where it was the tradition that when an elder person reached a certain age, they would be taken up to the mountainside and they would be left there. And the family was never to go and find out what happened. And usually the people never came back. So, well, this cherry farm's grandmother reached that age, and the family had been dreading this time. But anyway, the grandmother reached this age, and so she thought, okay, well, we're going to have to plan our trip to go up, take me up to the mountain. And so they planned a big picnic because they didn't want to leave Grandma up there, just, without any kind of a saying, goodbye saying. So they went up the mountain and they started walking. And as they walked along, the grandmother said, Oh, it is a shame that I will never be able to look down into the valley again and see old man Randolph's cows down there. And then a little bit further on, the grandmother said, perhaps we could stop right here. I'm pretty old. I'd like to take a break. Could we stop right here and have a little snack? And so the family stopped and they snacked. And the grandma said, oh, do you remember this time? And do you remember that time? And she just brought up one after another wonderful time that the family had enjoyed together. So then, after a rest, they continued on the way, and the grandmother continued with her, oh, look over there. Do you see this? And do you notice that? And the family, as always, was amazed at the wealth of knowing that the grandma was able to share with the family, because She had the knowledge of having lived all those years and had learned so much from all the people who had come before her. Well, anyway, back to the story. So, they finally reached the top of this hill, and the grandma says, well, I think it's time for us to say goodbye. And the children, there were 3 of them, they broke down crying and said, please, 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 we don't want to leave Grandma up here. We love Grandma. We want to know Grandma. Grandma has so many stories inside of her. And, well, after a while, the parents agreed too. Well, they had agreed all along, but they were trying to do what they thought they should be doing, the thing that their people had been doing for generations. But they had, they found a really lovely cave, as lovely as a cave could be, and that's where they put Grandma, and periodically somebody from the family would go up and secret food and other things that Grandma needed. So as time passed, winter was really hard. It was really lonely. The people couldn't get up the mountain to see how Grandma was doing, and they were very, very concerned that perhaps the cold had been too much for her up there alone in the cave. And finally, when springtime came, the family was able to send somebody up, and Grandma was pretty cozy in her cave, well, as cozy as you can be in a cave, and so they continued bringing Grandma, food as it came in, but there was something wrong this year. There was everything that they planted seemed to die. There was a drought in the fields nearby. The cherry trees seemed to be having some kind of a problem, and nobody had any answers. And whatever the problem was, it was affecting almost every type of crop and grain in the area until the first planting, the second plantings. They were blighted, they were gone, and no one knew what they were going to do. Well, one of these children had mentioned this to Grandma, and Grandma said, okay, because the people were really getting hungry and they were wondering what to do. So Grandma told them to go out there on the back side of the house and take down part of the roof and beat it, because back then they had roofs that were made out of different kinds of grasses. And so they beat that grass, and the seeds that were in there came out, and they were able to make a little bit of porridge. And eventually, some of the neighbors saw that these people were just not as hungry as the other people were, and they caught on to this idea about beating the roof, and people wanted to know how. How did you know to go out there and beat your roof to get the seeds so that you could make a little bit of porridge? And so they wouldn't tell. And so as time went by, they were still trying to figure out what to do. And the grandma said, take some of the seeds from the roof and see if they'll grow. Who knows? That's your only option right now. So they did. They planted some of the seeds, and lo and behold, it took a while, but yes, they did germinate and they did grow. And the people in that family were ecstatic because they were going to be able to have bread. And, of course, all of their neighbors saw this, and they asked, what are you doing? And they explained to them, well, we're planting some of these seeds and hoping that they come up, and they seem to be coming up. So please, do the same. And finally, the town got together, and they came to the cherry farm, and they said, all right, people, how do you know this about the grain? How do you know this about the roof? How do you know this? And finally, under all that pressure, someone, or maybe all of them together, confided that when they had taken Grandma up to the hillside, they had secreted her away into a cozy little cave, and she had stayed up there, and she was sharing this information with them. And the people at first were like shocked because they were admitting to having broken all of these rules that they had for their culture. And then they cheered, and somebody started running up the hill, and the next thing you knew, the entire community was running up the hill, but nobody knew where the cave was except for this family. And so finally, up the hill, they said, okay, where is the cave with the grandma? And they said, okay, Grandma's over here. And they called Grandma out, and everybody cheered because they realized that there was a lot of wisdom in the elder people. It may not seem like it until there's some kind of an emergency. So don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, or whatever that saying is. We need all of the resources of the people that we can get so that we can all move forward. And thank you for listening to this Wellness Arts Cafe. You can expect in the future to hear stories that are specifically for children and stories that are more for adults. And you will also hear interviews and see art being made and whatever else I'm doing here in the Wellness Arts Cafe as a part of Creatively Being. And thank you very much for being here. And I hope you tune in again and subscribe.